Better thinking, faster decisions, bigger ROI. This is the Finding 12 Minutes podcast. The idea is simple. If you can find 12 minutes of efficiency in your day, you will gain an hour every week, and that changes how we work. Each episode is focused on practical ways to use AI, technology, and smarter strategies to help you move faster, think clearer, and get more done with less effort. So let's find your 12 minutes. So this week, I want to talk about innovation management, particularly in the age of infinite ideas now. AI has really just given us an opportunity to ideate and innovate much faster and infinitely more than we have in the past. So if you go back and look at innovation as a whole, it used to be difficult. You needed budgets, you needed developers, you needed specialized expertise, consultants. You would hire consultants to come in to help you with your ideation and your development of your ideas. You would need months to test an idea. But today, that one person with AI can really build a prototype before launch. And you see this with events like vibe coding events, and you have people that are using tools like Replit and Lovable, Claude Code, and a bunch of other ones to where they can just rapidly prototype. And it doesn't cost them anything really just to kind of come up with these new ideas. So this whole barrier to innovation has just collapsed. And that's kind of created a new problem, right? Most organizations don't have an innovation shortage. And I like to say this often too, is that most organizations don't have an idea problem. We have an execution problem for the most part. So right now we have an innovation overload. You know, every employee has ideas, every vendor has a platform, every conference has a new trend. Every week, there's some new tool or new feature or new function that's being released by any number of tools. And those are the pre-established tools, and those are even new tools that no one's even heard of before. Boom, new tools. So when you think about that, every week, there's just something new that we have to deal with, and it is essentially helping us generate new ideas and really kind of creating an innovation challenge for us. So the challenge is deciding which ideas deserve attention. So we have this concept of an innovation trap. Many organizations, make one or two mistakes. The problem is now AI can actually expedite that to where instead of making one or two mistakes, you could be making 10 or 12 mistakes very rapidly. So the first innovation theater, right? Like we think about that, like that we're just, it's very performative in a lot of ways to where we think we're being innovative, but we're really just a bunch of activities, a bunch of concepts and ideas that aren't really going to materialize in anything. And I think we've touched on this in previous episodes to where you have organizations that are pulling back on basically this concept of token maxing. Just come up with as many ideas as you possibly can and burn through all your tokens without any real recourse or any path towards innovation or any path towards return on that investment. Where everyone's encouraged to so at this point, everyone is now encouraged to innovate. We have tools to do it. We have the ability to do it, and it's happening much faster. But these ideas are now just being collected, not necessarily turning into an investment, not necessarily turning into a return. So, you can hold a workshop and you can run a vibe coding event and you can just pump out new ideas. But at the end of the day, again, nothing is being implemented. The second thing that really comes to mind when I think about this innovation dilemma, so to speak, that we have now is that innovation is really starting to create chaos to where we have all of this tech debt, we have all of these ideas, we have things that aren't connected to each other, departments replicating features and functions in their apps. What you find is you have a ton of duplication. So when every idea becomes a pilot, when every pilot becomes a project, and every department is basically building different tools, but they may actually be building the same tools. Soon, nobody's application and nobody's idea, nobody's innovation is going to matter anymore, right? If everyone is special, then no one is special. But innovation, to me, is not necessarily the problem. Innovation management is. The biggest mistake that I think leaders are making right now is that they're treating innovation as like, this is a good thing. We have all these great ideas, but they're not necessarily managing that innovation throughout the whole process. Where do we go from idea to revenue? And I think that's where most leaders right now are making mistakes, simply because they're just encouraging people to come up with as many ideas as possible. Again, go back to that concept of token maxing. Most people hear innovation, they think disruption. I hear innovation, that's what I think. I think, oh, being innovative, we're going to disrupt the market. Some people think that they're breakthrough products, breakthrough business models. They could be industry changing ideas. But for most organizations that don't win through this transformation, don't really kind of manage or win through this transformational innovation. What they do, or how they really do win, is not through this big win, hitting a home run, going going for the fences, so to speak. They win through incremental innovation, small improvements, small efficiencies, small enhancements. But if repeated consistently over time, that's where you're really going to win. Could you come up with a really big idea? Could you swing for the fences? Could you hit that home run? Could you have that Hail Mary type product? Absolutely. But those are so far in between, in terms of that you're probably just coming up with new ideas that are solving existing problems. That's not really monumental or industry shifting. It could just be an efficiency play. But consistent incremental innovation that is repeated over time, that's where most organizations are going to win. So you have to think about this as like an innovation pyramid. You need to think of it in the pyramid as really kind of three levels. The first level, that foundation level, is that it's really the incremental innovation, right? It's one of those things to where this is where most organizations should spend their time. And why do we do that? So, well, there's some examples on why people want to do that, right? So when you think about innovation, right, we think about when AI first came out, what could we do right now that it would actually make a difference, that would actually get us utilizing these tools? Well, you know what? Using AI to summarize your meeting notes was a perfect example of something incremental. I'm not changing my process. I'm not changing the way we do product delivery. I'm not changing the way we do client delivery. All I'm doing is just summarizing my meeting note. What did that allow us to do? Well, that allowed us to kind of test and really kind of figure out whether or not AI was one of those tools that could be integrated into our processes. It was a great first step. That was an excellent way to kind of figure out where this kind of fits in. Another practical example, if you actually create proposals, reducing proposal time, and it has nothing to do with getting the AI to actually write the proposal. Sometimes it was just using AI to summarize vast amount of documents or rewrite something. So when you think about just kind of that the work that actually creates the most friction, if you're developing a proposal, it's usually finding information, getting information, answering the questions accurately so that you can actually get to a draft that you can actually get close to being able to submit. Obviously automating repetitive reporting, anything that's data driven. AI was doing a great job eliminating manual data entry, improving client communication. I know that there's been some huge pushback with I've this sounds like it's AI written, but this sounds like it's an AI slob. I get that. But what you do find is that when you think about improving client communication, it's not necessarily about writing the email. It's not necessarily about writing the social post. It's about, how do I formulate and take an idea and make it concise enough? So utilizing your own words and then using AI to kind of help kind of fine tune that is where I really saw improving client communication. All of these initiatives, and I've been preaching these things for the last 2 or 3 years, is that they're very low risk. And not only were they low risk, they're also low cost, and ultimately can tie it back to faster ROI. And then the best part about all of that is that this was highly adoptable. There was like really no friction to using an AI note taker to transcribe a meeting notes. What risk do you have in there? Unless you're in an industry and your client doesn't want you to record those things. But those are kind of, for me, more things around the cost of doing business with particular clients. But if 80% of your meetings could actually use, or you're allowed to use, an AI to summarize those meetings, again, high adoption rate was really there. That second level of the innovation pyramid is really just adjacent innovation, or what I call adjacent innovation. And this is where you want to start thinking about it from the sense of, where are new services? How do we actually expand exactly what we're delivering today and offer new services? Tangentially connected to that is capabilities, services and capabilities. How do I expand my services and my capabilities? And so then what you're going to find is that that's a good way to kind of grow your business. And then ultimately kind of think about, where there are new revenue opportunities. Think about adjacent markets. Think of, if I'm selling in one industry today, is it applicable to sell it into a new industry tomorrow. So if you think about if you're selling into professional services firms, well, you know what? Consultants, accountants, lawyers, they're all very, very similar. And so what you want to do is how do you figure and find those new revenue opportunities? So some examples are practical examples for this second level or this adjacent innovation layer is, creating AI enabled consulting services. Think about chatbots. Think about being able to take programs that you do or assessments and turning them into AI enabled consulting services, something that's more self service, monetizing internal data. And I think this is where the big thing is for most organizations. You think about organizations that have been around the hoop for a good bit, they have a lot of data. So how do you monetize that? Because a lot of these AI tools don't work without really good data. Could you be in a position, does your firm or your company collect data in the sense to where that it could be valuable to somebody else? So you could also looking at, launching new product offerings to existing clients. Using AI best to kind of understand where the client is, how do they buy, and then what is the next likely purchase for that particular client? And I think that next likely purchase and being able to get outside of a spreadsheet and start doing research and having the tool assist you is immensely valuable. And these require a little bit more investment, but they're really just building on existing strengths. So it's transformational, but it's not monumental in terms of the lift or the effort. So yes, you're going to have to put a little bit more time and money to kind of build some of these things out, but it really is just building off those existing strengths and then looking to monetize those. And then the third level within this innovation pyramid is more the transformational innovation. These are what I would call like the moonshots. We always talk about red ocean, blue ocean. You want to kind of think about what's the new business model? Where are the major technology shifts? Should you be actually creating, your own kind of AI bots or allowing your customers to create AI bots on your data? What else could you be doing? What is very disruptive to this whole process? What's that one disruptive idea that would completely change the trajectory of your industry, help you garner new revenue? And what are those things that are really going to create those headlines, right? The things that are really going to shake the industry and get people to want to kind of replicate what you're doing. And so, but again, while this sounds sexy and this sounds glamorous, this should only really represent a real small percentage of your innovation portfolio or your innovation ideas. You have to be thinking about it as focus on levels 1 and 2. Those are going to be your big bets. Could be, call it 80-20, right? 80% is focused on levels 1 and 2, where only 20% is focused on this third level. So again, these really big moonshot type ideas really should make up a small portion of your innovation portfolio or your innovation strategy going forward. And so you have to think about, why is that the case? Well, you do have the AI effect, right? AI can amplify these really big ideas. You can generate big ideas faster, but it also can create a dangerous illusion because, it's easy to come up with the idea, not as easy to execute on it. So when you think about that, just because it's easy to kind of create that thing, that concept, that idea that you think is transformational, you have to assume that it is worth creating, but that's not necessarily true. AI has dramatically reduced the cost of experimentation, and it has eliminated that need to prioritize because we think that we can do everything now. And the funny thing is that you can, again, we don't have an idea problem. You can come up with 30 ideas, but can you execute on 30 ideas? Are they all really good ideas? I like to use that concept of, where people misrepresent the idea of you need to flush out ideas. Well, no, I think the phrase is flesh out ideas. But you can flush bad ideas. So what you want to do is you want to flush out those bad ideas. Just because you can build something doesn't mean that you should. So you need to create that innovation filter. You need to think before investing in any innovation effort. And I like to say, let's ask, 5 questions. What problem are we solving? Who are we solving it for? Who benefits from that? Right? Right. And how do we going to measure that success? And what happens if we do nothing? And, the last question really comes down to, what's the cheapest way to learn whether or not this works? So how do we test this? So notice the focus. It's not about building. It's not about technology. It's all about learning. So your innovation is a portfolio, or you have to think of it as a portfolio. The best innovators think like investors. Not every idea deserves the same investment. Some deserve a conversation, some deserve a pilot, some deserve a full commitment to do it done. The goal isn't about picking winners. The goal is about managing risk while accelerating learning. You have to start thinking about yourself as if you were a private equity investor. So protecting the innovation culture is key, right? You don't want to stop people from innovating. Many leaders do worry about that if we put too much governance, it's going to kill innovation. And the opposite is usually true. People become frustrated when there's no process, when no one knows how the ideas are evaluated and how resources are allocated. Good innovation management really strives to kind of eliminate that. You want to kind of have a known process through this whole process. It creates clarity. People know how to contribute, people know how decisions are made, and people know what success looks like. This is, again, going back to that 12-minute connection. This is where the entire conversation really does come together. The most valuable innovation in your organization this year is probably not a billion-dollar idea. It is probably a small improvement. It's a process that gets faster. It's a workflow that gets easier. It's a bottleneck that disappears. Then it's finding another 12 minutes, then another, and that's incremental innovation. When multiplied across the organization, small improvements become transformational results. So the future doesn't belong to organizations with the most ideas. It belongs to organizations that can evaluate ideas faster, learn faster, and implement faster. Most innovation doesn't look revolutionary. It looks slightly better. It looks like a slightly better process, slightly better customer experience, a slightly faster workflow. So innovation isn't about chasing every possibility. It's about creating a system that consistently turns good ideas into measurable value. Just because a world is where everyone can now innovate, the competitive advantage isn't innovation itself, it is innovation management. And that's your 12 minutes. If you found value in this, share it with someone who needs to work smarter, not harder. And remember, small efficiencies compound. Find 12 minutes a day and the results take care of themselves. I'll see you in the next episode.